podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen.
Season 2, Episode 36, Harmonic Context.
All right, Eric. I thought we'd have a grab bag episode about all things relating to harmonic context. There's a few topics that they're definitely different than each other, but they all relate back to this idea of putting things in context, specifically harmonically. So I thought the first thing we would touch upon, we've talked about this before on the podcast, this idea that, if you look at the hierarchy of tonality or the hierarchy of harmony, I think we're on the same page, but I think there are different viewpoints on this, but tonal patterns come from harmony, come from functions. It's not the other way around. So I've said this for over a year now on the podcast, that the way that we teach kids and we teach students how to label functions, we kind of get them to verbal association, and then we start doing things like, oh, when you hear, la, do, mi in minor, that's a one chord. And that is a declarative definition of what a one chord is. That is not audiating what a one chord is. So some students, when you show them how to sing a tonal pattern, they just naturally understand what we're trying to get at. But I think in many cases, and just for efficiency, you're better off giving people tonal patterns and actual harmonic examples, because bum 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 being sung is different than hearing a minor one chord played as a full gestalt, played as an actual harmonic event. And those are different kinds of learning. And I think we're fooling ourselves when we think that by teaching students how to sing a tonal pattern, how to label the tonal pattern with solfege, we can turn that into an understanding of the function at an audiated level. And so I think we're really on the same side in this sense. But what do you think about that? What does that cause you to? I mean, it's essentially what we're getting is, why do you even use the keyboard when you teach harmonic learning sequence? Right?
I feel like I'm talking to myself. Yes, you just said everything that my brain has struggled to wrap itself around. When I found out that young kids, before they can sing in tune, can understand functions, it kind of turns things sideways a little bit. So now you've got a verbal associate equivalent from the get-go. Does the song end here? Or does it end here? No. Yes, and that's so easy for, so I have a 2-year-old that'll sing the resting tone every time I play yes. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
He'll sing yes, right, boom, yes, bam. And so if they can understand yes and no, that in major or minor or both, then doesn't that give them a leg up to sing tonal patterns? And the answer,
I personally find that fascinating, that kids can do that before they even have singing voices that they can properly wield. Their ability to identify something with audiation precedes their ability to actually sing in tune in a lot of cases.
Yeah, they recognize. It's listening vocabulary before performing vocabulary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's got to be in the listening vocabulary somewhere. And if you haven't listened to a lot of songs, it makes no sense to be teaching tonal patterns, right? Because then you would have to acculturate and imitate tonal patterns, randomly and purposely respond to tonal patterns to get them in your listening, which is one possible way to do it. Right? You don't have, just think those are some pretty powerful vitamins for learning songs, is to know tonal patterns. Well, it's easier
Sure.
the other way around, though, right? You've got the listening vocabulary of all these songs that are major and minor and others, and then you add tonal patterns to them to bring more understanding, to bring audiation. But where do those tonal patterns come from? You already said, it comes from harmonic functions. Why did he pick those tonal patterns? How come he didn't pick a Kodai sequence of, so
Yeah.
mi or whatever, because that's easy, whatever. Why did he pick? Because he understands that harmony is the basis for tonal patterns. Somewhere along the line, that just makes more sense than anything else. So,
Mm-hmm.
so now you got kids, can understand tonal patterns and then label functions, or do you understand functions and then label your tonal patterns? It, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. I've mentioned this on the podcast. It's been a long time since I mentioned this, but um, when I was reading Engelman talking about in his book Theory of Instruction, like hierarchical types of learning, he always says start with the higher level concept. And so don't be scared about the word concept. In this context, audiation is technically a type of sensory concept. It totally jives with what Gordon is talking about. But basically, what Engelman is saying is that if functions exist at a higher order, they need to be discriminated first before lower order concepts nestled within that. So what is he getting at? He's saying that if you have tonal patterns and you have functions and you have tonality, you should start with like the highest order concepts first in terms of instruction. And so, I mean, you could even make a case for starting with labeling major and minor before all this stuff. But I think what's more to the point, what we're talking about here is that people need to identify functions as whole units before they get into singing individual tonal patterns. And what's amazing about this is like if you have a student that can already understand how to hear 1 chords and 5 chords, and then you start teaching them tonal patterns, and then you give them the definition. Okay, every time we have a 1 chord in major, it's actually just some form of do mi so. It doesn't matter like which version of it is. It can be all these different versions. Students are kind of like, okay. But when you go the other way around, it causes problems. And Engelman uses a lot of examples like this. Like if you teach the concept car or boat before you teach the concept of vehicle, it can mess up people's formations of the concepts properly. So you teach higher order concepts first. And I've been blown away by how applicable this is to music learning theory. I mean, you can make the same case for teaching meter, and we're not going to go off into meter in this example, but I would rather have students be able to label things duplo or triple before they get into labeling individual patterns. And you just do this through teaching familiar songs. But on another level, it's something Eric and I have always said, and I think we should remind people, is that we're not recommending taking anything out necessarily. We're not saying, we're saying use songs, use familiar songs, use tonal patterns, and also do this other thing at the same time. We're not recommending making less time for singing and dancing and singing tonal patterns and stuff like that. We're just saying add this other, facet of learning on top of things, which is an important point because I think there's a tendency, or there could be a tendency to think that we're arguing against, doing something, but we're just
It's an
we're saying there.
and conversation.
Yeah, it's an and.
Yeah. Add functions to tonal patterns so that you be very explicit. Not all the time, because could be a crutch for kids to sing back in tune. But add
Sure.
add the accompanying tonal, or add the function to the tonal pattern so that it's more explicit. And kids like that concreteness. There's no doubt, because do mi do could be a 6 chord. Right? Not supposed to sing
Yeah.
it, supposed to sing it, but Yeah. And then I had two people at the conference come up to me after my session on the blues, and they said, and they're the first timers, and they said, a function is the whole, tonal pattern is the part, and you go back and you understand the function better. So it's a whole part whole in which harmony sits as a part of a song. So it's a whole part whole. So you've got the whole function. The parts are the individual tones that make that function up, and then whole. So it's a whole of a whole part whole harmony, tonal pattern, better audiation of harmony. So I totally agree that tonal patterns help your audiation of harmonic function, and that a label that's not sung, but I mean you can sing them on the roots, which is a whole other thing. You just need 4 or 5 tones at all in the singing range, and that's all you need to sing roots of hundreds of songs. So there's less to learn, and so that makes it easier. You learn the roots to the songs, then if you can sing the resting tone, it develops the understanding of harmony and resting tone to understand functions. I mean, functions are harmony, but yeah, I mean, they're the whole. Functions are the whole, and then the part and the whole, and that's such an important piece. And Bluestein made such a great big deal out of that in his book, and it got covered later. It was not something that was you're going to find in the early editions of learning sequences in music, but it's such a powerful concept, right? You give them the bucket, and then fill the bucket, then give them the bucket again. At the end, you got things to put in there, and that's how we grow our audiation, right? Depends what we put in the bucket.
Well, and then when you launch off with these two different methods of learning tonality and harmony, hearing functions and singing root melodies, and then also singing tonal patterns. When you start taking that into other harmonic concepts like learning harmonic form and this idea of harmonic patterns, which is something else we wanted to talk about, you can see how applicable this is. I mean, and we've talked about this in terms of like learning jazz standards and stuff like that. But like a lot of university jazz students are told to, you just play the arpeggios, aka tonal patterns of all the pieces you're learning. So, you're playing Autumn Leaves, you just play an arpeggio over everything. But if you don't do that with the bass lines and the harmonic gestalts, you're really missing something. And that's why so many choose any of your favorite famous jazz saxophone player. Most of them can play piano to like a pretty decent level. You'd be surprised. Like Jerry Bergonzi is like a pretty damn good piano player. And there's a reason all these giants, Kurt Rosenwinkel doesn't typically record piano on his guitar albums because he's a monster guitar player, but the guy can really play piano and he knows the keyboard. And same with Pat Metheny. He spent so much time studying harmony at a piano. The reason is because it helps you hear harmonic gestalt. It increases your understanding of harmony in a way that you don't get from just playing single tones. And that's most likely why the piano has been exalted to the degree that it has, is because it facilitates this just unreal harmonic understanding that you can't get, that one person can get. If you play with a choir, you can do all this, but if you want to study harmony in your room, it's pretty expensive to get a choir to come to your house and just sing all the tones you want them to sing. You might as well just have a keyboard to do it. And so, I mean, that's one thing I always like to point out to people, is that all these great horn players and a lot of them can play keys decently, or at least know how the keyboard is laid out, even if they don't have the physical chops to play the keyboard well. I mean, even Eric. I mean, Eric knows his way around a piano, and so do I. But the case I want to make here is that if you don't have this ability to play and understand harmonic gestalts, you lose out on harmonic form a little bit, because take these. And this is where I want to go with the conversation in terms of learning harmonic patterns. Obviously, I'm a big fan of learning tonal patterns and all that stuff, but I think when you think of tonal patterns, they're really useful to commit to memory because you're going to find them in the literature and you need vocabulary. I think we need to crank this a step further and say there are typical harmonic progressions that we should just have committed to memory. You should know what 4-5-1 sounds like, or 1-4-5-1, or 2-5-1-6, or 6-2-5-1, or all these progressions. Like there are some it's just like learning tonal patterns. You can't possibly learn all of them.
Yeah.
You can't possibly commit all of them to memory. But there are certain ones, depending on which genres you're in, you should have just full blown committed to memory. And I've become more convinced since talking to Eric off air that this should be part of our curriculum. Is teaching students. I think they should be 3 or 4 functions long, like kind of that zone. I think once you just start teaching like 8 chord functions, 8 chord progressions, it's kind of just gets silly. It's like doing an 8 tone tonal pattern. It's like there's not really a point of that. But something small, and Eric was talking to somebody about this. Can one chord be a pattern? I don't think it can, because a pattern kind of implies that there's multiple things being repeated. But I do think that the one chord. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to investigate like what that means.
I think that's a perfect question to ask.
You get patterns from it, but it's not a pattern itself, because it's made up of a whole. And then when you talk about harmonic patterns, then you got a function and another function next to it, at least 2.
Yeah.
And likely 3 is better.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think having things like 5-1, 1-5-4, 1-1-4 is invaluable. But this is the whole claim I've been making. Like the value of learning licks. I got to sneak this in everywhere I can. Is that you learn something contextually you don't learn when you break things down into micro parts. And so if you learn how to sing things that go over 2-5-1 explicitly, it streamlines your audiation. Because if you need to improvise over 2-5-1, and after every chord you're singing you're singing something that goes over 2 chord, and then you do this like mental pause, sing over a 5 chord, mental pause, sing over the 1 chord. It's literally like trying to speak a sentence and be like, okay, I got to get a noun here, and then I got to get a verb here. It's just insane. It's not the way people actually process information at a fluent level. And so we need to learn patterns and baselines that connect whole ideas, just like we learn whole sentences, And then after you know what 2-5-1 sounds like enough, you can screw with it and start changing it. But you don't learn that as well unless you learn the whole pattern, I find. And I mean, go listen to Mozart. Every single friggin' sentence or period ends with these progressions he just hammers in every song. Like he clearly had them in his long-term musical memory. But I think that's an interesting place to go, because what this could possibly lead to is like being more strategic about the way we teach even tonal patterns. Making instead of making sets of tonal patterns that just kind of go off in random orders and mix. If you're singing 1-4 or 1-4-5, putting them in strategic orders. That go 4-5-1, pause, 1-4-5-1, because I think that's more musically usable.
Yeah, you're stringing patterns together like you do at those 2 levels of learning and discrimination level, the synthesis levels, the composite synthesis or the partial synthesis. You're stringing things together, and you're doing melodies, little tiny melodies that are licks, right? So
and that's one place it can go. Yeah,
you're combining tonal patterns and rhythm patterns to make melodies. Nobody says don't learn a lot of melodies. You should learn a lot of melodies. Well, these little melodies, there's nothing wrong with learning little ones, little licks, because they're powerful if taught, with your eye toward audiation, with your ear toward audiation exercise. Are they melodies that outline the chord progressions, and are they melodies that fill in chord progressions? Are they melodies that toy with chord progressions? See, now you're adding extra tones to these functions, which is really powerful in jazz, of course. Um, that you've
Well,
got.
that's where I love Burt Ligon's distinction here. There's two kinds of improvising harmonically. There's harmonic specificity, where you're just explicitly you're trying to plant objective functions in the listener's mind and really point out, like, I want you to hear this function when I'm playing this melody. And then there's harmonic ambiguity, where you're maybe playing something that's more melodic or scalier that could imply many different functions underneath it. And I see licks as a way, to do both. Because when I mean licks, the lick could just be straight up tonal pattern. Like it could just be very vanilla tones outlining a function. But the lick could also be something like that with more stylistic elements in terms of connecting the chords and yeah.
Yeah, and it's more than a tonal pattern. It's the rhythm and the style, because you've got time as one of the contexts that you're playing a lick in, right?
Yep.
Whereas tonal patterns don't have a time context. Harmonic patterns don't have a time context, but harmonic progression does. This is kind of the vocabulary I've developed to get more specific about it. Like a progression is bound by the harmonic movement inside of a song. So there's time context. A harmonic pattern, I'm just teaching you maybe 1, 4, 1. Here we go. Oh, good. Now I got a broken key there. All that futzing around.
Well, then I'd like to amend my earlier statement. I think that we should be learning harmonic. I think we should be learning harmonic patterns and actual progressions. I think yes. Actual progressions should be, and we've talked about this with, we need a name for this, Eric. It's about time. It's been over a year, but the nursery rhyme 1151. It's in so much stuff, and it's a monster progression, and it's the beginning of learning about harmonic form and form in general. I mean, form can be learned through rhythm, it can be learned through melody, but I think it's really important to learn form just in the context of harmony, like just hearing chords being played in these like more macro structures. Because without that, improv loses its forward momentum. When improv is just a bunch of rhythm patterns and tonal patterns just kind of thrown in, it's almost like telling someone, like, improvise a sentence, and they're just saying things like boat, car, ice cream. Like, they're just throwing words out of their brain. Like the words have no the words have no syntax. They're not leading towards anything. And when you don't have this like harmonic form syntax, something happens in the improviser's mind where the ideas don't become coherent, in a sense. Like they don't lead anywhere.
Yeah. And the reason those functions work in these pieces that are timeless is, they go into a section. This chord is more important than that chord. To make everybody land there when you need to land. When you bring something from say you're improvising outside the changes a little bit. When you bring that back, you don't leave people hanging. You bring them back, and you land somewhere. Where do you land? Maybe the last 8 bars, or maybe on the bridge.
Eric's making such a good point. Improvising, like a lot of newer players think playing outside is like just doing nonsense. What you're doing is you're playing outside of the verbatim harmony, but you're not actually playing outside of like the form of the piece at all. So like if the tune is 1151 and you're going to play outside over the 5 chord, really what you're doing is you're just changing the 5 chord to something else, but you're playing totally within the harmonic form of the song. That's what allows the song to take that beating when you go. And that's why I think learning these progressions is so important. Like if you learn 1-1 something 1, you can put anything in there. I mean, I've even shown this. You can just go 1-1, smash the keyboard 1. The rhythm is so powerful at pushing that harmonic form that the song can like pretty much handle anything, especially in major. My God, that's probably why bebop, like, 70-80% of the songs are major.
So I use harmonic patterns outside the context to draw attention to exactly what this function is and what it's not. So this is why this 1-4-1, 1-5-1, are good patterns, right? And then 1, 4, 5, 1. There's another pattern. I'm just playing like this is tonic, this is not. This is tonic, this is not. So what is this thing that's not? Don't worry about it yet. Is it here? No. Is it here? Yes. Okay. So now you add to that, and so you got yes, no, then add something to it. And those patterns draw attention to the 4 chord, or whatever chord you want to do next. It can be the 2 chord if you start in jazzers early. So just 2, 5, 1, or 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1. Here's 1, 5, 1. Remember that? 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 5, 1. 1, 2, 5, 1. Just bump, bump. And now put it into a progression where it belongs in the song. So now it's confined by time, because I want to take away any of the extra motor power that you might need to keep it in time when I'm not interested in whether it fits in time yet. I just want you to recognize and identify that pattern. And that's what I call rhythm or harmonic patterns. It's like doing 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, double dominant. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a pattern, double dominant, dominant tonic, double dominant, dominant tonic. I just want you to get that. So these are patterns that are easier for children to distinguish. And then when you find them in songs, you're only adding the time to it. And sometimes doing that makes it even easier because that function comes on this word or this part of the form. Like right before you go back
I completely agree.
to the A section, right? So in some ways you're doing things that's a little harder first by these patterns, like name these patterns, then but they're harder to keep in mind than if they're in a song, because you've got a bigger, better context. But in terms of identifying the functions, I keep them in patterns and then put them in progressions, but they both feed each other. So let's just leave it at that.
A great example of what Eric's talking about is like the turnaround at the end of a blues, like a 1-6-2-5. I learned that as a pattern where I just played 1-6-2-5 over and over again. But when you hear someone play it in the blues, it goes right before you head back to the start of the form. That's traditionally where people are playing it. The form, if you have the form of the blues already internalized, hearing the 1-6-2-5 at the end of the blues is it's quite easy, because your sensation of the form is also helping accent where the progression should be. And so you start hearing it in context in a different way. Like 1-6-2-5 in stormy weather sounds way different than 1-6-2-5 at the end of a blues form, because you have a different awareness of the form of the piece at large. And I actually think that's how you teach students form, is by showing them the same pattern being placed in a different context. And when they know they hear the same pattern, but they're like, something sounds different. What is it that sounds different? It's that you're hearing form. And that's how you show students things like harmonic form, is showing them like, hey, this is the same pattern, but it's being played like here in this song and here in the other song. Like, what is it? What is it about this that sounds different? And then and that's the same thing you can do with tonal patterns. You show student la do mi, but la do mi can be part of the 4 chord or in major. La do mi can be part of the 6 chord in major, or the God knows what, the 2 chord. And you show them like, hey, the same thing could be all these different things. And you're showing them that the patterns are so dependent on context. Yep. I mean, that's the stroke of insight that MLT is like really based off of, like showing people in their audiation that context matters. Context of harmony, context of meter, context of tonality, all this stuff. It's all about context.
Yep. Tonality is fundamental, and then harmony is also fundamental above tonality.
It's so cool. There's so many ways this can go,
Yeah, it makes sense in every which way, and then just 23 years of teaching the kids and learning from them how it's easiest for them.
Mm-hmm.
And learning along with them. I didn't know a 5 of 5 except theoretically, say 30 years ago.
I
And
think a lot of jazz musicians struggle with hearing like secondary 2/5s because they're not doing it like this. They're not. I mean, you need a few elements. You need repertoire that has these functions in them, or everything's just going to be nonsensical
yeah,
in the end. And then
yeah,
you need to know how to basically force someone to hear it in the right context.
yeah.
And
And a D7, and
but
say we're in C major, a D7. So what is that? Is that the 5 of 5? Right? Where can it go? Can it,
mhm.
right? It could go to a G minor. All of a sudden, you're bringing around that. And then the G minor is a 4 chord to the 2 chord. So now that D7's become D minor, and now that D minor could be 2-5-1, D minor, G7, C. So that D7 has multiple functions depending on where it goes. It's like, the fact that the root could be the same and the function can be different, that that's why we come up with little ray and big ray, or little law and big law. Like, where is it going? Uh, Big law could go to D minor. It could also go to D major in C. So the dominant of
Mhm.
the is the dominant of the dominant of the dominant. So let me play it. Oh, that's why I stopped playing. I forgot I had broken notes. It's like, right? If you're here, right? But you get there from here. And that's different than this. Same functions, just added notes now. But it's like,
Yeah, I mean,
where
I
are
see
you
that.
going?
I hear that D7. I hear that D7 in C major going a lot to D flat
Yeah,
7 after a
yeah,
D or D
yeah.
D flat major 7. I mean, that's a really common progression. Yeah. One of the things that gets me excited about this is that this helps like 2, 3, 4 year olds learn how to hear harmony better, and it also helps people that are at their upper level game of playing music add new sounds that they've never heard before. It works in both contexts, and for me that's just screaming like some kind of validity.
Yeah,
Like there's just like empirical weight behind it. Whether like you can run the randomized trial of this, but you have enough evidence that okay, when I do this with students, they seem to learn harmony like in general better. Obviously, some kids
yeah,
have higher aptitudes for this stuff and all of that, but
yep,
um, that's why when I teach piano, I make such a point of playing harmony with kids as they're playing melodies because at a really early age they can't do it themselves. They can't literally play their own functions. I try to get them
yeah,
there as fast as they can, but I try to have it. We play the melody of a song with no functions behind it. Then I'll sing the song while I play the chords, and then I'll play it both hands or whatever. And it's important that people start seeing that. And Eric always brings up a really good point that I think we should all take seriously is that in terms of listening vocabulary, people can handle a lot more than you think. I mean, we have this tendency to like, oh, I shouldn't be putting like tritone subs into songs for 4 year olds and like weird harmonies. But like, if you don't give it to them at this age when they're 3, when are they gonna learn
yeah.
it? Like, it's
No,
just listening vocabulary. Like, we give it to them.
Coltrane wasn't avoiding hearing stuff growing up, right? He wasn't avoiding anything. He was
And so while I'm passionate for all this, like, really systematic curriculum in terms of like, okay, let's go 1 chord, 5 chord, 4 chord, big two. Let's have a system for how we get people to do this. But you got to be careful when you're doing things like so controlled and sequenced and tight knit. Like, don't forget to add in listening vocabulary that's outside of that. I mean, I've been just so blown away. Like I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but like I teach all my students like a half diminished, a minor 7 flat 5 chord off of 2. So like it's basically like a minor 4 chord with a Ray in the bass, but everyone can hear that. It's like it's so easy to hear. Like it's easier to hear than the 4 chord is. In old jazz tunes, you used to see minor or major 6 chords everywhere, or 6 chords everywhere. So you'd see like C in C, you'd see like C major 6, F major 6, and then they do like a minor 6. So it'd be like F minor with the D on top. But that chord I was talking about is basically if you put the D in the bass or Ray in the bass. But you'd be blown away. Like this chord sounds theoretically like a mouthful to say to somebody, but auditionally it's very easy to hear because it just stands out. It's like, oh yeah, it's that like weird sound that keeps popping up. And I've been blown away. Like I've had students that are 4, 5, 6 that can point that out. They can identify it in a song when I use it or when I don't use it. But it's cool, you know. Yep. It's very cool. Well, these tritone subs are just, and this is one area where some of these chords. Gordon mentioned this in his little book on harmonic improvisation, and I think he's bang on with this. That learning to hear secondary dominants before typical 7th chords, like minor 7th chords in major and minor tonality, is easier because the secondary dominants have like a harder pull and they stand out more. So like if you're in the key of C, you start hearing like D7, E7, F7, like all this kind of stuff. They're easier to hear than normal minor 7s like D minor 7, E minor 7, A minor 7, you know, F major 7. They just stand out so much, and I think he's just right on the money with that.
My kids have a much easier time with double dominant than they do with subdominant. It sticks out.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I think I gotta change my order. You know, my content order.
Yeah, this has been my experience with following Eric's curriculum. I use different songs sometimes and all that, but I generally follow the same initial pattern that Eric does, where I go 1, 5, 4, and then 5 of 5 or big 2, or I like calling it big 2. It's fun, but that chord is easier to hear than the subdominant chord for like most of the students that I've encountered. It's just like, whoa, it just stands out. So I mean, that's some fun stuff, you know. But again, to my point is like, you might think if you approach this really theoretically, you might think like, no, they should hear the 4 chord first because the 4 chord is like native to the major or minor tonality. But that's not necessarily the case. We're talking about audiation. We're not talking about theory. So like, what's easier to audiate is not necessarily like theoretically described easier.
Kids that never heard, you know, the double dominant, call it no right away. They call it, and it's no of another no. It's the no of the no.
Oh, interesting.
The no. So they call it no. When I'm presenting it brand new, and I say, "What's that?" Yeah, and I want them to say, "I don't know. It's something different." And they guess no, and they're right. It's not.
I mean, that's a good sign. That means
because yes is you know, it's like it's a strong no. It's a stronger no than no is. Like it's not. That's not where you're going to rest. You're not going to rest there. So in a way, you know, it's further away from home. So it's a stronger no, but not as in terms of establishing tonality. But it sticks out. Where the 4 chord has it in it, has the do in it. So, but so does this, you know, re fi la do. So it does have do, but it's the 7th. It's a tone that needs to change. Where the 4 chord, that do doesn't need to go anywhere.
You know, it's funny. We were talking earlier about the importance of having listening vocabulary, because I've encountered a lot of teenage musicians who they try to learn like tritone subs and like all this crazy harmonic stuff, but they don't actually listen to songs that have those in them, and so they have no like contextual understanding of the function. They just know theoretically they can play this thing, and it doesn't work. I was born in 1990, and I just looked it up. Aladdin, the movie Aladdin, came out in 92, and I watched Aladdin a lot as a kid. And the song, we're not going to play it because Disney will sue us, but the song Fred Like Me It's a minor song, and it has this function. It does the 5 of 4, right? And I remember when I was when I was studying jazz, and I was sitting at the piano studying harmony, and I played a 5 of 4, I instantly thought of that song. And I mean, this just proves the power of listening vocabulary at a young age. Because I was listening to this 2, 3, 4 like so much, and just from playing the 5 of 4, like when I was like 15 or 16, that song immediately came to my mind, and so it was proof, that at a young age I was hearing that harmony, I was hearing that function, and it's still for me the one that is like closest to my listening vocabulary. It was just such a cool experience.
So my first experience with a quintuple dominant, 5 dominant, I like, well, I was just playing, 5-1, 5-1, 5, just doing circle of fifths, right? But so if you're in C major, B7, Mr. Sandman,
Yeah,
is the dominant of,
it's a 5-3.
it's
It's surprisingly common.
but it goes, 5, right? It's quintuple to the quadruple, to the triple dominant, to the double dominant, to the dominant, to the tonic. It's just a circle of fifths. When I heard that, I'm like, oh, Mr. Sandman makes so much sense to me now. It's like
Yeah.
it's the 3, but it's that 3 is the dominant of the submediant, but that submediant's a dominant of the supertonic, if you want to call it that. The big.
I mean, this is what I learned from Joe Pass, is that you can just turn everything into a dominant chord. I mean, and you're fine. Like it's so strong. Like the ear hears those 5-1 relationships so strongly that, and there's a lot of juice in there. I used to play this Beatles song, and I'm forgetting what it was, but I would always see this progression that was like C major, and I knew the song was in C major, so you hear like a 1 chord, and then there'd be B7. I was like, what? Like where does B7 come from? And then once I started studying some jazz harmony, I was like, oh, it's just a 5-3. And then 5-3 is like, you don't hear it a lot in Bach. He apparently was not a big fan of 5-3, but in swing and jazz and standard jazz tunes,
Is it big 3 or little 3? It's little 3. In fact, it's diminished 3 often.
Well, there's that too. There is that too. Yeah, that's a common progression. But
like Stella by
that 5-3 and that 5-3 and that 2-5-3. When you're playing standard jazz tunes and things just start getting weird and you don't know like theoretically what's going on, it's like 9 times out of 10, 2-5-3 or 5-3. It's like always that chord. Whenever things get weird, it's Misty. It's in the bridge. It's just like that's where 5-3 is. It's funny, but it's a cool sound. I like that sound very much.
Yeah,
All right, Eric.
I beg and plead for people to send me these chord. Like, where do you hear that? We need a library of listening vocabulary for like what are all the tunes that have 2-5-3?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think ChatGPT is there yet. This is what I want. I want basically a program that can be like, give me all the songs in major tonality, like basically just like an engine for finding repertoire that's hacked into where people are on their tonal or rhythm sequence. I want all the songs that only have divisions up to here. Go.
Yeah, we need somebody who's a great jazz artist, like on the level of Herbie Hancock, and just knows all the songs and has music learning theory.
Well, there is a site, and I forget the guy's name, but he's got a site. It's called like Vanilla Changes or something like that, and it's just like all these jazz tunes analyzed with like the most basic harmonic functions. Like all the fluff has been removed. Something Vanilla Changes. I forget the guy's name, but it's a very useful resource. But yeah, I mean, these jazz progressions are really interesting because when people don't have the awareness of this secondary dominant thing and secondary 2-5 specifically, the way people analyze tunes is so convoluted and overcomplicated.
So is it Ralph Pat?
I think that's the guy's name, yeah.
And they've got I'll put a link in the show notes. opinions on Ralph Pat's Vanilla Book by Jazz Guitar Online. That'll be good to read. And then Vanilla, the Vanilla Book Song Index. There you go. After You've Gone, Ain't Misbehavin', Airmail Special, Origin, Alexander's Ragtime Band. That's just 145 and a 5 of 5. All of Me. Oh, these are great.
Mm-hmm.
All these I know. I know almost all of these songs. April in Paris, Angel Eyes. That's a good song. Those are all the A's. Look at that. Black and Blue, Blue Monk, Bluesette. All right, there's a handful in here I don't know. Like I would recognize.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. By know, I don't mean I can audiate them and write the changes down without some help. Those are great. Now, where are the blues tunes in here? Yeah, no, so we've got a lot of homework to do to come up with a library of harmonic functions, harmonic progressions, harmonic patterns, listening vocabulary, licks to go over all these. Like, what are the best licks?
Yeah.
Like the ones that stay true to home, and then the ones that go out, and then compare them to each other. So 2-5-1,
Mm-hmm.
2 flat 2-1.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think in terms of the progressions, some of these are cross different tonalities. So this 1-1-5-1 progression that we keep talking about, that's in all these nursery rhyme songs. This is not even wed to a specific tonality. I mean, you can use this in Locrian, and that form of progression is so rock solid that it carries over. And so there's other ones too. Like the Beatles often use this thing where it's like 1-5-5-1. So or it's 1 something and then reverse it, something 1.
Mm-hmm.
So 1-4-4-1, 1 something something 1. He calls it the mirror progression, but it's in a ton of stuff too. Like Beethoven uses it, and like it's really cool. It's
it's more harmonic context and how context helps form. The form is held up through harmony. It's James Jordan mentioned that on that form is really a function of the larger harmonic picture.
Yeah, because that's where the tension and release actually comes from, is from the harmonic rhythm and the harmonic form. That's where you feel when you can feel a 1 chord coming, whether or not there was a 5 chord before it. It's because the form is suggesting it.
Yep.
And that's what I was saying before, where if you don't have that, improv is really weird. Improv is
But yeah, harmonic
it feels more
learning-
just like jamming improv feels just like jamming random things in.
But harmonic learning sequence is not accepted in the MLT community.
Yeah, not yet.
They don't know.
Maybe that's our next episode.
No, that's a 2-hour baby there. No, I just think change is hard. Changes are hard.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man.
All right, Eric. Till next time.
Later. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.